Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of What's on My Desk. Today I have an exciting one. I have a uber complicated timepiece from Lange. I have the earliest and the latest from Urwerk. I also have one of the holy grails, so one of the Trinity, the Vacheron, along with a watchmaker that I feel deserves a lot more attention. So I'm going to start it off with Urwerk. And what do I have here? I have the Urwerk Titan Scorpion. This is the titanium UR150 or UR150 Ti as it stands, right? Look, nobody, and I mean nobody, has industrialized and weaponized the wandering hours like Urwerk. And you all know the original story. The Campari brothers built night clocks for Pope Alexander VII, where a rotating disc carried the hours across an arch. Why? Because he had insomnia, and every time he put a clock in his room that ticked, it kept him up at night. No traditional hands, just traveling time. Cartier, they revisited the concept in the 1920s, and Audemars Piguet experimented with the star wheel in the 90s. But Urwerk did not treat wandering hours like a revival piece, if you ask me. They pretty much built a brand around it, right? The early UR101 and the UR103 locked in the formula. You got your orbiting satellite hours, the linear minute tracks, features the case architecture. They dubbed the original watch, which I actually have here. Wasn't going to talk about it, but I figured it's worth bringing. Actually, the first Urwerk ever made. They displayed this one in 1998 back in Puzzle World. And this watch was dubbed the Sputnik because it looks like the Sputnik, right? Again, their futuristic case architecture and, of course, the mechanical theatrics. Time wasn't just simply displayed, it was performed. Let's jump to the UR210. This is what introduced aggressive retrograde energy and user interaction, if you ask me. The UR220 kind of refined the mechanics further, but then the UR100 made the concept more wearable, even expanded into cosmic measurements and things of that nature. Then came the UR150 Scorpion, and this is where the architecture actually changes. For years and years, Urwerk relied on a Maltese cross to index the satellites. Reliable, proven, right? Centuries old, if you will, but the UR150 carries the heaviest satellite blocks you've ever seen built, right? They pair this with a 240-degree retrograde minute hand that snaps back at 1/100th of a second. That's very, very fast, right? The inertia alone would probably destroy traditional indexing systems, right? So they scrapped it. In its place, they engineered a flying wheel and a pinion system built around a snail cam and a rack. For 60 minutes, a follow arm climbs that cam, building tension in a massive in-house spiral spring. And on top of the hour, it drops off the edge. The stored energy releases instantly, and the minute hand snaps back to zero while the entire carousel rotates 270 degrees to bring the next hour into position. That's what they dubbed the Scorpion Sting. You guys have to conceptualize and visualize the mechanics of that and how difficult that is to execute. The other thing they did is that you have to kind of control that violent return. So they borrowed from minute repeaters and installed a centrifugal speed governor. So when the hand actually flies back, energy vents through a spinning flywheel that acts like a brake. So there's no bounce, no shock damage, just, I guess, control force, if you will, right? Flip the watch over and you'll see the twin turbines. These are not decorative, right? They regulate rotor speed, they absorb shock like pneumatic air brakes, they protect the movement during sudden motion. The entire watch is basically about managing energy under stress. Some details, titanium case, I already said that. It is 42 millimeters this way and 52 millimeters this way. But the curved construction and angled lugs, let me just take this off, actually make it wear lighter and tighter than the numbers suggest, right? Because you think, oh my God, 52 millimeters, that's a lot. But you see on my relatively small wrist, this hugs the wrist pretty well. It's limited to 50 pieces per version. Blue, dark, and Titan. This is the Titan version. To me, the Scorpion proves that they've mastered how time moves. When you step back and look at the progression from UR101, 103 to the UR210, the UR210, the UR220, and the UR100, and now the UR150, it's not really random, right? Each model kind of tightens the mechanics and pushes the concept forward. And this is what I love about Urwerk. You can't predict what they're going to release next. But when it arrives, you can always trace exactly how they got there. This is not an experimentation. This is a deliberate evolution. Moving on to Corum. That's right, Corum, and not just any Corum, the Corum Billionaire. This happens to be the white gold full diamond version, meaning diamonds on the side, diamond and baguettes in the front on the bezel. Now look, if I had to sum this up, this is actually a factory disaster that turned into an iconic design. I'll explain. Back in 1966, Corum had a factory accident that changed their DNA forever, right? They received a shipment of dials and that were for a new model, but they were missing the hour markers. Seems like a total disaster, right? Maybe not that big a deal, but a bit of a disaster, right? But It actually wasn't. Rene Bonvard decided to engrave the Roman numerals directly onto the bezel. That mistake became the Romulus, a tribute to the founder of Rome and the birth of Corum's most daring design cube. Now, for decades, the Romulus evolved. It started as a clean dress watch in steel and gold, then it became a platform for perpetual calendars, retrogrades, and serious complications. Then entered the Romulus Tourbillon Billionaire, and I'll get to Billionaire in a second. 45 millimeters. Time it came out big, it was better. 18 karat white gold, but yet diamond, sapphire, skeletonized architecture. These came in sapphire versions and emerald versions and ruby versions, et cetera, et cetera. It had a flying tourbillon suspended in a transparent sapphire structure, as you see here. Now, the manual wind caliber, 372 or 374, had a 90-hour power reserve, which is pretty impressive. And they were making, I think, 8 pieces per versions, if you will. There were some piece uniques and things of that nature. Price tag was north of $500,000. Now, this wasn't just jewelry pretending to be a watch, right? This was jewelry housing real horology that can be linked back to who? None other than Christophe Claret, in my opinion, one of the most underappreciated watchmakers out there. Claret trained in Geneva. He came out working alongside with Roger Dubuis. He collabed with Dominique Renault and Julia Papi, the same duo that built Audemars Piguet, now highly complicated powerhouses, Renault and Papi. By the late 80s, he had already founded his own manufacturer at Leloc, focusing entirely on complicated movements. We're talking minute repeaters with cathedral gongs. We're talking split-second chronographs, bitourbillons, GMTs layered with perpetual calendars. You get the picture. He's also the guy that developed the Opus 4 for Harry Winston when Max Buser was still there developing the Opus line, right? He co-created Maître du Temps Chapter 1, which is a complicated watch. He built mechanisms most brands basically didn't have the capability to engineer internally, right? And later he launched his own brand. He pushed complexity even further. Fully mechanical blackjack watch, baccarat, poker watches with true randomized systems and chiming gongs. I mean, these were not gimmicks. These were real mechanical complications built into a watch. They actually worked. I had them. I've used them. It's insane. Technically, this was elite. Commercially, unfortunately, it was difficult. The brand faced restructuring, financial strain, because scaling ultra high-end complications at that level, it's brutal. A lot of companies just don't make it. But that's exactly why this matters, because when you place a tourbillon engineered by someone with a resume inside a case saturated in baguette diamonds and sapphires, you're not hiding basic movements under flash. What you're doing is you're pairing serious complication pedigree with unapologetic access. And that's what elevates this from, I would say, jewelry watch to statement piece of credibility. When the watch came out, traditional houses were still preaching understatement, right? Quiet luxury, slim complication, and Corum said, F it. They named it Billionaire on purpose. It was provocative, it was loud, and it was definitely unapologetic. It showed that there was a serious global market, especially in the Middle East at the time, and emerging wealth hubs that wanted wrist presence and horological substance in the same object. Look, the Romulus started as a factory mistake. The Billionaire ended up being a statement. And whether you love it or hate it, one thing is certain, Corum didn't just make a watch. They made the industry look at wrist wealth completely different. Moving on to one of my favorite brands, a Lange Söhne. And it's not a Swiss brand, it is a German brand. Of course, what we're looking at is a Lange Söhne Turbograph Pour Le Mérite. Now, Lange Söhne came out swinging when they relaunched. And when you hear Pour Le Mérite, it's not the model name. I'd say it's a warning, right? The name comes from the highest Prussian order of merit. Lange only uses it for watches that contain one thing, a fusee and chain transmission. That could be a whole video on its own. Look, if it says Pour Le Mérite, it means constant force, no exceptions. Why does it matter? Well, simple. Most mechanical watches lose accuracy as the mainspring unwinds, right? And the fusee and chain is the solution. It's basically a continuous variable transmission, if you will, for your wrist. You have a tiny handmade chain. We're talking over 600 parts easily, some as thin as a hair. And they wrap around a cone-shaped pulley. As the power drops, the chain moves down the cone to increase leverage. Fairly simple concept until you have to get it down to a size of a wristwatch, right? It keeps the force constant from the moment you wind until the moment that it stops. That means accuracy. Lange started this in 1994 when they dropped the original tourbillon Pour Le Mérite in their very first modern collection. That was Germany telling Switzerland, hey, we're not here to participate. We're here to compete, boys. This was a tourbillon with fusee and chain in a wristwatch, and it has never been done before. And then in 2005, they escalated with the Turbograph, which is the watch that we have here. Here you have a tourbillon, a fusee and chain, and a Vacheron split-second chronograph. And if you know chronographs, especially split-second chronographs, you know they consume a boatload of energy, which makes constant force delivery even more critical. This wasn't stacking complications for marketing. This was engineering, I guess, pressure testing, if you will, right? And then, of course, for the grand finale, 2011, the richer length tourbillon pour le mérite shifted into a regulator-style layout inspired by scientific clocks. Precision became the headline, the design got cleaner, the mechanics stayed insane. And the 2017 TurboGraf Perpetual pour le mérite, this is what, to me, is the ultimate Lange, if you ask me, right? Fusee chain, tourbillon, a split-second chronograph, and a full-blown perpetual calendar with a moon phase, all inside one movement. That watch with over 1,300 components, right? You guys sit at 43 millimeters, somehow they're still wearable. Now, this was a limited edition of 101 pieces, which is like the weirdest thing, by the way. They made 51 in platinum and then 50 in gold. Maybe I don't know, somebody can comment below and tell me. I don't know why they broke it down this way, right? But despite the insane complexity of all of these, they wear pretty balanced, right? Dial is staying classic on all of them. Arabic numerals, railroad track, clean symmetry. Symmetry, it's kind of like a thing for Lange, right? But again, extremely wearable. Heavy, in platinum specifically. It does sit a bit high on the wrist because you do have to fit all that stuff in there, but still sits well, as you can see. Again, slightly small on the average wrist is what I have. Look, most brands will struggle to build any of the things or any of the complications that I just mentioned on its own. If you look at the latest perpetual split-second chronograph, if you just look at the split-second chronograph tourbillon split-second tourbillon that I have here, right? And you're able to squeeze all those complications into a chain-driven power system. I think that goes to say something. The pour le mérite, it's not about incremental innovation. It's like saying, this is what we can do when we remove limits. And this particular one, this is, to me, one of the clearest statements they've made thus far. Moving on to one of the Holy Trinity, Vacheron Constantin, and I brought the Overseas Tourbillon Skeleton in titanium. Why did I bring this one? I'll tell you in just a second. But before we do that, most people get the history of the Vacheron Constantin Overseas kind of completely wrong. So I'm going to quickly run through it because the real story starts in 1977. We're talking about the time where all the main sports luxury watches have already been made. We've already seen the Royal Oak, we've already seen the Nautilus, we've already seen the Girard Perregaux Laureata, right? Among a few other things. Well, they started in 1977 with the Vacheron Constantin 222. I don't have the original here, but I figured I'd bring the remake, which they recently made, to at least show for reference, right? That watch was designed by young Jörg Heisig for the brand's 222nd anniversary, surprise, surprise. It was thin, it was angular, it was sporty, and completely different from traditional dress watches Vacheron was known for, much like for all the other major brands of the Holy Trinity, right? Integrated braces, sharp case, a bezel that hinted at what would eventually become something bigger. This was basically the foundation, if you will, right? Now, the Overseas name didn't officially show up until 1986. Since then, we've really seen three major redesign errors. The first generation in 1986 was handled by Dina Medola and Vincent Kaufman. This is where we got the iconic Maltese cross integrated into the bezel. Then 2004 gave us the second gen, which beefed up the case, gave us that world famous metal bracelet, beefed up the case wide, bigger was better at the time. But the real game changer was 2016 when Vincent Kaufman stepped up again for the third generation, giving us 6-notch bezel, the sapphire case back, and the genius tool-free strap change system that honestly I think every single brand should have. A lot of them already have it, but I think everybody should have it. And this brings me to this, right? Overseas Tourbillon Skeleton, grade 5 titanium, reference 6000D. This is what happens when you take the third generation architecture and push it all the way. This thing is 42.5 millimeters. It's super light, again, titanium, 50 meters of water resistance, not 30 notice. Anti-magnetic constructions, that's pretty much every watch has now, not that big a deal. It's not just a safe queen, you can actually wear this thing. By the way, I brought her on a bracelet, but it's just as easily interchangeable to put on a strap. I actually prefer it on a bracelet. I love the titanium bracelet and the fact that it's still super light. Caliber 2160 SQ, automatic tourbillon, peripheral rotor. If you look at the back of a skeleton watch, oftentimes automatic, they have this awkward rotor that blocks half the movement. So you have to like move it around to look at it here. Instead of sitting on top, the winding mass runs around the dial, giving you a perfect view of this absolutely gorgeous movement. Why is it absolutely gorgeous? Because when you look at this completely skeletonized architecture front and back, you see the Geneva seal finishing, you see the NAC treated anthracite bridges, you see the hand polished bevels, you see the circular graining on the wheels. The tourbillon cage is shaped like the Maltese cross, actually. Even the Minitrack floats on a sapphire ring with blue velvet finish. It is industrial, but it's still refined. Now the question is, and you guys can comment below, is this the best looking Overseas we've seen? I think so, and this is why I chose that one to talk about the latest and greatest Overseas. Guys, I want to thank you as always for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, comment below, let me know your thoughts, and share this with those you think may enjoy this content. Other than that, I'll see you on the next one.